Today on the Relationship Revival podcast, I am joined by Tracy Taris. Tracy is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's president and owner of Healing the Mind and Spirit, Inc., where she leads a team of counselors. Her group practice is located in Santa Clarita Valley, where psychotherapy services are provided in the form of couples, family, individual, adolescent, and child therapy, as well as coaching services that cover a variety of topics from creative blocks, nutritional problems, and women's issues. Tracy is here because she just wrote an amazing book called Many Voices, One Truth, which is available on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. And I'm excited to dive into what drove her to write this incredible book and how it can help you in your journey. You're listening to the Relationship Revival podcast with John DeBach, also known as Mr. Spirituality. That's me. I'm your host, giving you insights and guidance from over 10 years in the field of this amazing journey we call romance. On this show, I go over everything you need to know about how to get into a relationship, how to get the most out of a relationship, and sometimes even how to gracefully end a relationship without pulling your hair out and going crazy. And occasionally, I'm even joined by new and old friends who are also relationship experts to bring you guidance and wisdom with new perspectives. Thanks for stopping by. Tracy Taris, thank you so much for being on the Relationship Revival podcast. It's great to have you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me here.
I love having authors on. I feel like authors have so much to say. I have a book written somewhere in a drawer that I just haven't had the courage to do the marketing and publishing on. So I'm always eager to kind of hear how it is getting through the other side. And your book, Many Voices, One Truth, starts with a personal story. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind kind of starting with that story here on the podcast and kind of, we can kind of explore from there and why you chose to start that way.
Because it was a time of great distress, and it ended up being one of the catalysts for the book. I had received a phone call about one of my baby sisters. I'm the eldest, and that she had had a stroke, and she was only 37 years old at the time. And so I flew to Texas with 3 of my other sisters so that we can go and see about her. And while I was there, I set about the task of getting social services in place. I mean, because at the time I was working with case managers in the mental health field to help people who need social services. And I knew that my sister wouldn't be able to go back to work right away. So I started, filling out forms and doing all of that and not really paying attention to how I was feeling or what I was thinking about the fact that she almost died. And in the middle of all of this, I started having this just big, huge feelings of anxiety and wondering what was going on with me. At first, I thought it was because I wasn't being aware or attending to what the real problem was. And it was my grief over what was happening. But what I realized is that it triggered an earlier memory for me where my mom traced my palm and told me that I was going to die young. And so this was a belief that I held my whole life. And I thought I had dealt with it in my own therapy and, in going to church and, prayer and all that kind of stuff. And
can I just interject for 1 second, just so I understand the context, because that's a pretty big. Was your mom just joking around and didn't realize that you would take it lightly? Was it like a weird, cruel moment? What was the context of that?
My mom is a bit of an enigma. She wasn't joking, and I don't think that she was being cruel either. I think that in her mind, I believe now that I'm an adult and I've had all my own therapy and everything like that, I believe my mom had some form of Munchausen by proxy where, she would get sympathy and, because what she said was, you're going to die young and I'm going to be devastated. Almost like that was something that she would look forward to. And I don't think she meant any harm. I just think my mom had problems, just had issues of her own. Definitely grew up in an abusive type home, which is what made me go to therapy in the first place. But yeah, going back to that story.
Sorry for interrupting. I just had to figure there was like such a hole there for me that I needed to know. Go ahead. Continue.
Yeah.
Continue.
No, it's just my mom being my mom, almost like making up a story in her head as she's going and then including me in the story.
Yeah.
Because a lot of moms who actually do have Munchausen by proxy would have a fantasy of that in their head, but they wouldn't share it with their kid, or they have some kind of medical incident and then share that with other people for the purpose of getting sympathy. But
yeah.
I think that she was thinking out loud,
okay.
Now that I know my mom was all that. But yeah, so in the middle of that, I realized that, I still have this belief. It's just that it's deeper. And so I called a friend of mine who actually helped me to figure this out. And she said, this has nothing to do with what's going on there with my sister and everything. It's what you believe about yourself. And so it really made me ask myself, what do I believe about myself? And how many things do I feel like I've healed from that are really deeper down in the recesses of my soul? And that was definitely one of them, because I had gone to therapy for that specifically and had done a lot of work on it. But I decided to write the book because I realized that this is what my clients do. They have thoughts and beliefs in their head that even though there's evidence to the contrary, they're still being driven by these deep thoughts and beliefs. And so I decided to take those two reasons as, catalysts for writing the book. And here we are.
So is the book about sorting through, kind of sifting through those thoughts and figuring out which one to listen to and kind of building that strong sense of truth or narrative in your life? Is that kind of the system you're kind of going over?
Yeah, it's about sifting through the different thoughts that compete for our attention on a daily basis. And in the book, I use the analogy of broadcast networks, because I grew up with only 4. There was cable, but we only had ABC, NBC, CBS, and PBS. And so I thought about that and thought it should be the broadcast voices of self, Satan, society, and Savior. Because I do work with a lot of Christian clients.
Sure.
And any one of these voices can be going on in anybody's head, not even just Christians. Like a person that's not Christian might experience it as negative thoughts or dark thoughts, and things like that. But in the book, I teach people how to identify and differentiate between the 4 different ones, and then tune into the ones that are edifying, because self and society aren't necessarily negative. It just depends on what you're thinking about from your past, or what beliefs you have from your upbringing, or even from your adult life. Because like social media gets a bad rep, but there's a lot of good on social media. There's a lot of people sharing good information. And if you're taking in that information and you're using it as a catalyst to better your life or better yourself, then great. But if you're taking in the information and engaging in comparison and using it as a reason to shut down your own dream, or have beliefs about yourself that you'll never be as good as, fill in the blank, then it's not so great.
Yeah. Do you find that there is a go-to tool? Because I know you talk about different tools in the book. Is there a go-to tool where, like, if you were seeing someone as a therapist that you start with, what's like the good stepping stone, dipping your toe in the water, getting used to this idea of navigating with, between these 4 different voices?
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends on what's going on with the client. But one tool that I use pretty early in the process is something called a thought record. And it's just like different columns where there's an event. How did you feel about the event? What was the automatic thought? And then I explain to the person that even though you may feel the feeling before thinking about anything, you really have thought about something about the event. And that is what's causing the feeling. So I provide psychoeducation on the idea that there's nothing on the outside of you that can make you feel anything. It's what you're thinking about the events, people, situations that's causing the feelings to rise up. And so I teach them how to navigate that thought record so that they learn how to challenge the thoughts they're having and search for evidence and find either a true way of looking at whatever it is they're thinking about this situation or an alternate way. And that way it teaches them how to bring down the charge of the feeling. So if the feeling was anger or fear at 100%, a lot of times it goes down to 0, or they'll say, I don't even feel that anymore because because of the way they're thinking about it.
Yeah. Just addressing the feeling and understanding it, kind of examining it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Understanding who you are and how you're thinking. And then when we get into looking at the thought record later on in deeper ways, at first it's just, this is what I thought of this, and this is how it made me feel. This is a different way I can think of this. And now this is how it made me feel. But then later it's, where do these thoughts, why do you think in this way? Like, why is that your go-to? And oftentimes we're able to identify where that came from. And most of the time it's just how they were raised and how communication happened or didn't happen in their families, whether they were put down a lot and, criticized a lot.
Yeah. When you're dealing with couples or even just two friends kind of have this, where the relationship is suffering because of this pattern that they've kind of got into, that they're learning how to break, hopefully, with these tools, do you find that it's helpful for them to share this mentality or this methodology with their friend or with their partner? Or how do you kind of go about healing the relationship? Since there's two parties involved, it gets a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, it's rare that I use the thought record with couples, but I have in some occasion where I have them both sitting there doing their own thought record and we're just going back and forth looking at it, or I'll have them do it together on an event just to show how diametrically opposed we can be in the same situation and in the same relationship, but thinking in completely different ways, like taking in information in different ways. But one of my favorite tools to use actually comes from this assessment tool that I use called Prepare Enrich. And it's a communications tool that kind of uses elements of Imago, where you go back and forth. And the tool, it's called 3 Wishes, where I have them write down 3 things that they want more of or less of in the relationship. And then I teach them the idea that communication hasn't happened until the message sent is the message received, and provide psychoeducation on what typically happens when people miscommunicate is, one, the communicator will bring an issue, the receiver will listen, but not really, and then land on one thing that the communicator said and then respond with something that's way off. And so then the information or it becomes a conflict because the communicator will say something to the effect of, but that's not what I said, or that's not what I meant. And they end up arguing about what wasn't said and what wasn't meant instead of whatever the issue was that first came to the table. So this tool uses the idea of assertiveness and active and reflective listening, so that you are actively listening to what your partner is saying. You're not landing on something that you're going to go off on a tangent about. And then you reflect back what you heard. So what I heard you say was da 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 da. And then you ask, did I get that right? And once they have gotten it right, and you'd be surprised how many times couples, even though we're sitting right there, and they'll say stuff that their partner actually didn't say. And so once they get it right, the directive is to ask the receiver will ask the communicator, how would you feel about our relationship if this wish came true? And then they would communicate using an emotion word. I would feel heard. I would feel loved. I would feel appreciated, whatever. And then the person would reflect that back. So I heard you say you would feel whatever. Mm-hmm. And then they would ask, what can I do to make this wish come true? And so then the communicator would present a behavior or something that they want to see changed or worked on in the relationship. And then the receiver will reflect back make sure they got it right. And then my directive after that is when you see this in your relationship to give praise to your partner, because this is something you requested and it's a wish that they fulfilled. And so what that tool does is it teaches them to be on the same page. Because if I'm asking you, did I get that right? Then we can't go any further until I get that right. You know, it doesn't leave a lot of room for me to go off on a tangent or for me to just kind of land in whatever filter I'm passing it through.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not something that said.
I love that. It does sound a lot like Imago. I mean, there's a lot of obviously similarities there. The one thing have you ever tried when it comes to the praise part, you know, especially if someone is not, if you're kind of going by the 5 love languages, if someone's not as verbally inclined, you know, the praise could be physical touch, or the praise could be, you know, making dinner for the person as like a thank you. I think that might kind of be a little cherry on top to make it really reinforce, like, oh, when I do that, I get what I want too.
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes we do talk about that, because sometimes there'll be someone in a couple that will say, well, I feel uncomfortable getting praise, or I feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so we'll talk about that. We'll ask, well, what would let you know that your partner has done what you've asked? What will let you, how will you know? Because one of the things that I teach on is we criticize in our romantic relationships, not necessarily because we are critical people. I mean, we are, but more than that, it's because of our amygdala that's always scanning for safety. And so we're trained, we're biologically wired or neurologically wired to look for problems, because problems need fixing and we need to get to work to fix them. And so when something is going right, we don't typically pay all kinds of attention to that, because we're wired to pay attention to when something's wrong so that we can set about taking care of that.
Yeah.
And it's not a bad thing. It's just the way we're wired.
And it's funny in a couple, in the classic structure, usually both the male and the female find the problems. And then like the way the women in my kind of practice have typically handled it is by trying to talk about the problems, where men immediately jump to 6 different solutions. And the women are like, hey, yes, I'm still in the emotional phase of exploring the problem. And the guy's like, that we're past that. Yeah. Let's go. And so sometimes it's just, do you ever feel like when you're dealing with a couple that your job is just acting as translator half the time? It's like, that's not what they said. Listen to it again, because they're on different pages.
Yeah, I call it modeling, and what I'm modeling is active listening. Mm-hmm. You know, because I don't have any stake in whatever it is they're arguing about, sure. So it's easy for me to just hear. And I'll say that to them. Like, I don't really have any stake in this situation that you guys are talking about. This is something you guys argue about at home.
Yeah, you're not going to do the dishes anyway. So
it's easier for me to just listen to exactly what they're saying. You know, and one of the reasons I do that is to minimize the shame on the person who's not listening.
Yeah. And
just kind of normalize that it's normal to not listen, but you don't want to stay there because it's wreaking havoc on your relationship. There are ways that you can learn to be a good listener and learn to tune in to your partner.
I know we got a little bit sidetracked, as I usually do when we start talking about relationships. The Many Voices, One Truth is definitely much more of an individualistic kind of approach and tool. Who do you feel like is the ideal person? Who'd you really write it for, I guess is what I'm asking.
The person that struggles with voices playing back and forth in their head, where there's a competition for what the person knows to be true in their gut, and then for what they feel to be true because of whatever's going on in the moment, or because of whatever's going on, has gone on historically. The person who typically, instead of taking in information right then and there, they're passing it through filters to try to come to some kind of conclusion. So anyone that battles with negative thinking, self-disparaging thoughts, thoughts that leave them in the darkness, the book has a lot of different exercises or interventions that are very heavy CBT related, but they're also married to prayer techniques and meditation techniques that I've learned over the course of my life, going on meditation retreats and prayer retreats and whatnot. But the exercises teach the person how to be still, how to settle down, how to go inward, things like that, how to become comfortable sitting in silence. Because the more quiet your mind is, the more that still small voice can rise to the top so that you can get the direction and guidance that you need.
How much does the spiritual side of things, the meditation, the prayer, inform your work on a personal level?
Oh, a lot. I mean, I grew up Catholic, and then I became Christian, which Catholics are Christians too. It just means I am non-denominational now. And the Bible is my main spiritual reference book. And I've read it pretty much every day for the last 25 years.
Wow.
And in fact, tomorrow is my 26th anniversary of, dedicating my life to Christ. So it's just in me. It's part of me. And so it comes out of me. So I would say it's a huge percentage. Like even when I'm not seeing someone who's a Christian, many of the things that come out are informed by what God says in his word and informed, by Christ and things like that. And I've had a lot of clients who have called and said, well, I came to you because you're a Christian therapist, but I don't want, I'm not a Christian. I just know how I'm going to be treated, and so sometimes instead of saying, well, the Bible says, I'll say, well, there's a saying that says, and especially if it's something relational, something that's going to bring peace and things like that. So I would say it's a good bit.
Yeah. Do you ever find that it's ever in conflict with something on the clinical side, or do you just find that it is, with the way your brain works, it's just always an enhancement?
It's the latter. The way my brain works, it's just an enhancement. But I also went to my master's program was Azusa Pacific University, which is it's a Christian university here in Southern California. And they had a big bend on the integration of psychology and spirituality, and so a lot of what we're taught is it's not necessarily, well, the Bible says this, so do that. It's understanding that the person is a spirit and that the person is made in the image of God, and that requires a lot of respect and honor on our part. So I think just going to a school like that probably helped to set me up in that way. But I think a lot of it is that's just how I've been living my life over the last 26 years.
And do you find when you work with people on an individual level that these bigger existential questions that sometimes come up in therapy about meaning, about, kind of deeper sense of purpose, does that, because of that background, do you have a slightly different approach than maybe a therapist who might be non-theist? Or I'm just curious because I know my own bias. So I'm always kind of, fascinated.
No, not really. I'm always meeting the client where they are, and I'm attending to what it is they want and what it is they're talking about. So if a client comes in and they're coming in for things like that, like deeper life meanings and what is my purpose and where am I going, we just kind of explore from that. A lot of people coming in for depression or anxiety or couples issues. They're not being so much existential, but the people that are coming in with existential questions are issues. Like I use a lot of questioning where I ask them questions because I'm a firm believer that pretty much everyone that comes across my doorsill, they already have the answers. My job is to just help peel away the layers. And in peeling away the layers, I'm not putting anything in there. I'm helping them to strip away the layers so that they can see what's already there and figure out how to live according to their own values. Because one of my beliefs is that one of the reasons we have a lot of distress is because we do have a value system, but some of the choices that we're making in our lives are not aligned with that value system. And that has nothing to do with faith or spirituality or religion. It's just what do you say governs your life? And so like, if you're saying that, family time is a big value for me, it's one of my top 5, but then you're working 52 hours a week, then you're going against your own value. And that's where some of your distress is coming in. Try to get that down to at least, 48, and go backwards from there, whatever's going to give you more time with your family. So
and I think your book does that really well, because you're showing them, how to unpeel the layers by giving them a framework in terms of listening to the voices and giving them the tools to do that. At what point would you say a reader could discern if the tools they're learning in your book are enough for where they are at, or if they should actually consider reaching out to you or someone else if they're not in your area for professional help?
Yeah, I would say try the tools first, because they are what you would probably get in therapy with a therapist. So try them and see what happens. See if you have more calm, see if you have more peace, see if you have a closer connection, in your faith. But if you are using these tools and you feel like, your ability to function in your life, whether it's in your job or in your relationship, if you find that whatever is causing the distress, whether it's depression, anxiety, a lot of thoughts, and you can't do that on your own by using some of the tools, absolutely reach out either to a pastoral counselor if you want to start there, or reach out to a therapist or psychologist, because it's an indication that there are some deeper issues going on. And the tools in the book are to help you learn how to identify the differences between the voices, but also learn how to calm yourself and, how to center yourself and things like that. But sometimes whatever's going on takes a little bit more work than that. And so absolutely, if it's interfering in your functioning in any area of your life, then reach out.
Great answer. Many Voices, One Truth is available on Amazon.com as well as BarnesandNoble.com. And I know you have a pretty handy email list to kind of give people more information as you come out with things and different kind of nice pep talks along the way and different things. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it's tracytaris.com/subscribe. That's how they get on the list. Is that right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
Taris,
And
if you're listening, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Or if you go to my website and there's a subscribe button. So you can just go to the website, tracytaris.com, and hit subscribe.
And in case you're listening to this in the car, Taris is Taris, tracytaris.com. Anywhere else you want to send them? I mean, I'll have your Instagram in the show notes and your website and link and everything, but is there anything else we should leave people with before we sign off?
Yeah. I mean, if you live in California and you feel like you want to get some therapy or come in and talk with anybody, we are a group private practice. So there's me, and then there's other therapists here as well that could tend to your needs and listen to your story and help you get from point A to whatever point you want to. But you'd have to be a resident in California. We offer in-person services and telehealth.
Great. Tracy Taris, thank you so much for being on the show. If you're interested in learning how to get the absolute most out of your romantic relationships, then you're in luck, because I have put together a free workshop or masterclass, if you will, about 3 secrets that people in happy relationships have discovered. You can view the workshop at mrspirituality.com/3 secrets. Again, it's completely free. Just go there and watch it. It'll help you on your journey, give you some wisdom, some things to think about. The website again is mrspirituality.com/3 secrets. That's mrspirituality.com/3, the word secrets. It's all yours. Enjoy.